everybody. And on behalf of the South Carolina State Park Service, I would like to virtually welcome you to Rose Hill Plantation State Historic Site. This is the second segment at Rose Hill Plantation on our Facebook Live post. My name is Ranger Stephanie, and filming is Ranger Nate.
Hey everybody.
We are going to head inside the mansion shortly and dive into our collections, learn a little about some of the artifacts we have in the mansion. During this time, when the parks are closed, park rangers like myself and Ranger Nate, we've stayed very busy. We're doing maintenance projects, cleaning, and here at Rose Hill, we've been doing a full inventory of our artifacts, of our collections. We're making sure that everything is in the place it should be, that we have recorded the conditions everything's in, and just checking up on everything. As we have done this collections dive, this inventory, we are looking at the artifacts, and we've pulled a few that we thought you might like to see. Now, some of the artifacts you're going to see today are on display in the mansion, that if you went on a tour before, you may have noticed them. But some of them are back in our collections room. They don't come out often because they may not be something we're interpreting right at the moment, or they might not be in the best condition, so we want to protect them. But we decided to take them out so you could see a few things that you might normally not get to see. Before we do head in, I want to give you a brief overview of Rose Hill Plantation. You may have heard it on our last segment, but if not, Rose Hill Plantation State Historic Site is one of the 47 parks in the South Carolina State Park System. We are located in Union, South Carolina. Rose Hill was about 2,000 acre cotton and corn plantation that belonged to William Henry Gist. William Henry Gist is known for being the governor of South Carolina right before the Civil War. He is known as the secession governor. Rose Hill was home to William Henry Gist and his family, and at any point in time before the end of the Civil War, it was home to up to 178 enslaved individuals who were forced to live and labor here. After the Civil War, post-emancipation, many of these newly freed people who used to be enslaved left the area. But some did choose to stay. They became tenant farmers and sharecroppers. Some of them stayed at Rose Hill. They farmed the land, had houses here, and they continued making the plantation profitable. These individuals stayed on the plantation up until the late 1930s. So Rose Hill was an active plantation from about 1811 all the way through the late 1930s. And then in 1939, the Forest Service was able to acquire Rose Hill, and they planted Sumter National Forest, which happens to surround the state park. We are 44 acres of state land right in the middle of Sumter National Forest. The Forest Service was able to sell 44 acres that is now the park in 1943 to a man named Clyde Franks, who restored the mansion and those 44 acres. And in 1960, the Park Service was able to acquire those 44 acres, including the mansion we're going to head in, and it became a state park. So we are going to head in now. I'm going to talk about some of the artifacts when we're inside, and then about midway through, we're going to switch who's holding the camera, and Ranger Nate will be talking as well. So let's head inside. I'm going to close the door here. We are standing in a room we often refer to as the ballroom. We actually don't know what this room was ever used for. During the time the Gist family lived here, it is possible this room was used as a ballroom. It's kind of a big room. It may have been used for dances, concerts. It's also possible that this room was used as a bedroom or multiple bedrooms. There's a very persistent rumor in Union County that there used to be a very sturdy removable wall that went up right over here. And if that wall did exist, they could have always removed it. We have some notches here, right in the corner, that show that there very well may have been a removable wall. The Gist children may have slept in these two rooms, and then if they had events like a ball, they could have removed the wall, stored it away with furniture, had the open space, and after the event, reset everything. The wall may have remained when tenant farmers rented out the mansion, and then at some point, the wall seems to have disappeared if it ever existed. but generations in Union County have insisted, many times rumored, that the wall was here. Though unfortunately, we just don't have no pictures of it. We also have here a little side room off from this bigger room that is our collection storage. And you can notice that we are set up here for doing collections. I'm going to take my gloves here because we are going to touch some artifacts. And if you remember, Ranger Chelsea at Redcliffe Plantation on one of her virtual programs talked about why we use gloves for artifacts. But sometimes when you pick up books, you can use very clean, washed hands, or you use gloves because human hands have oil on them. And we don't want that oil getting into the artifacts. But if you have very clean hands, you could touch the pages very carefully, or you could use nitro gloves like these. Another option for other artifacts is using cloth gloves if you don't have nitro gloves. But the cloth you have to be careful with because it can sometimes catch on some of the artifacts. So the best thing to use is nitro gloves if you have it. We happen to have a box that's open here. We hope it'll last us a while as we do inventory. So I'm going to point out one thing in here. You may have noticed when you looked around that we have mirrors, these huge mirrors in here. We don't know for sure if these mirrors were here when the Gist family lived at Rose Hill, but these mirrors date back to the 1830s. They were acquired by Clyde Franks, the man who restored Rose Hill in the 1940s and 50s. He felt like there used to be mirrors here. The mirrors are made of gold leaf paint on top of wood, some wiring, and then the mirror. So let's head over to our first artifact that I pulled that I would like to talk about. We have everything all set up here. This amazingly big book is an original Bible that belonged to the Gist family. William Henry Gist, we have his initials, WH here, and his second wife, Elizabeth. Unfortunately, whoever etched in the initials got Mary Elizabeth's initials backwards. She probably wasn't very happy about it, but she had to live with it. The Bible here is from 1842. The Gist family were Methodist, so this is a Methodist Bible. It contains the Old and New Testament. I'm going to open it up so you can get to see inside. We have some engravings in this Bible. They're very nice. And I'm being careful, you notice, don't want to open it too fast and do damage to it. It is an old piece, again, from 1842. And here is one of the etchings. And I'm going to open it up because in the center of the Bible, we have a family tree. Gives us lots of information. It's not actually a tree, it's just a listing of names, family record. We have a listing of marriages here, done by one of the Gist hands. They wrote it down. We have a record of births, baptisms, although the baptisms is very hard to read at the moment. And we have deaths. This is right in the center of the Bible. So we have the Old Testament, and then we have the New Testament right after the family record. And we can get a view of the New Testament start. I'm going to close it back up just to put not too much wear on the spine. This Bible was made, as I mentioned, in 1842, before the split of the Methodist Church. In 1844, 2 years later, the Methodist Church split over the issue of slavery. And we have another piece right here that was made in 1847 after the split. This is a hymn book, a hymnal book, where it has songs in it, particularly church-related songs. You can see it does have the initials. I'll pick it up so you can see. You notice that the spine here Doesn't look like it's in the best condition, and it isn't. That's why I'm not going to be opening it up for you. But you can see that they did have their initials engraved in this book as well. Now, the pieces that I've been showing you so far, we have a lot of information on. We know when they were made. We know who they belong to. And we're going to keep talking about a few of those pieces, and then we're going to move on to some pieces we don't know as much information about. Over here, we have a piece of artwork done by Mary Elizabeth Gist, William Henry Gist's first wife. This piece of artwork is a combination of needlework and paint. The outside is all needlework, the inside is paint, and then there's a note in the center. This piece was made in 1830 when Mary Elizabeth was 17, 2 years before she married William Henry Gist. She made it as a gift to her father for his 52nd birthday and wrote a little note to him for his birthday. And I have a piece of paper with what's actually in the note on it. I'm going to read it out. This simple wreath is painted by the hand of Philia Love as a tribute of affectionate respect and gratitude for the best of fathers on the 52nd anniversary of his birth, with the fervent prayer that he may enjoy many happy returns of it. May the evening of thy days, my beloved father, be as calm and serene as the consciousness of a well-spent life can make it, and when thy eyes are closed on terrestrial scenes, may thy angel convoys conduct thee safely into those celestial regions where all is happiness and joy. September 12th, 1830, Mary E. Rice. Rice was Mary Elizabeth's maiden name. So this piece she made when she was 17 years old as a gift to her father. We also have a dress here from later in Mary Elizabeth's life. It belonged to Mary Elizabeth. Yes, she was a very petite woman. This is velvet and different fabrics. You can see some nice beadwork in here. This belonged to Mary Elizabeth. We believe the dress is late 1870s, early 1880s. This was towards the later part of her life. And we're going to come over here. Oh, and before we come over here, I do want to mention, you may have noticed that there's a piano here. The piano, we believe, may belong to the Gist family. It's possible that it is as early as 1821. It's a Ricketts of Baltimore. We're still doing some research on the piano. It's a very interesting piece. This is something that Mary Elizabeth may have played. Women of the time that were elite women, like Mary Elizabeth, were supposed to be very good at artwork and music. You can see that she was very good at artwork based on that piece we just saw. She may have also played the piano and taught any of her daughters to play the piano. Now, before we head over to our next table, do we have any questions?
Might be losing some signal, so we will see.
Okay. Hopefully we don't lose signal. So this table, many of the pieces we're going to see here, we don't have much provenance on it. We don't have a lot of information on where exactly they came from, the date they were made, but they are interesting pieces. The first two I want to talk about kind of relate to climate control. So you may have noticed that we have windows open to get the sunlight in here. Currently, we have no power in the mansion, so we wanted to have our windows open. As of 5 a.m. this morning, the park has no power due to the storm. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten power back, but I do know that Broad River Electric, our electric company, is working hard to get it going. Because of that, we opened the windows so we can get a little light in here. But you may notice we don't have all the windows open. The windows we do have open have this special coated shielding glass panels on it to prevent UV light from coming in and damaging the artifacts. We limit light exposure into the mansion because sunlight can really affect artifacts and it can really wear them out, damage them. It can fade out fabric and artwork and do different things that can be very damaging. So we want to be careful on how much sun exposure we get. That's also why many museums, historic houses do not allow photography in their houses, or if they do allow it, they allow it as long as there's no flash. Rose Hill happens to also be the only historic house in the South Carolina State Park system with air conditioning and heat, something we're very thankful for. The Park Service added these new amenities pretty recently, but back when in the 1800s when the Gist family lived here, there was no electricity, no heat, no air conditioning. So they would have relied on fire and hopefully a good breeze for air conditioning. Here, we have an interesting piece. This is a bellows. This would be used to make a fire bigger by adding oxygen. You would kind of open and shut it and blow oxygen into a fire going in the fireplace. Hopefully you'll get that fire roaring and it would be good for a little while longer. And another piece we have here is a wild turkey feather fan, which would have been potentially very nice during a very hot day. This area where we're at has a lot of wild turkeys around it, so it's very possible some of the Gist ladies had wild turkey feather fans during their time here. And we have another piece here that's pretty interesting. It's an old photograph. It's in a case here. I'm gonna open this up. And hopefully we can get a good angle on this. It's kind of silver etching. We don't know who this woman is. It could be Mary Elizabeth Gist, as an older woman. It's possible it could be Mary Elizabeth's mother, Sarah. It could also be William Henry Gist's mother, Mary Boyden. Or it could be somebody completely different, and we don't know. Unfortunately, we don't know who she is. But you may notice it doesn't exactly look like photographs of the time. There were different processes to make photographs in the 1800s and into the early 1900s, and this is one of them. I'm gonna put it back down. The case, it has separated from the top. So I'm gonna make sure that's on there. And next I'm gonna talk about these two things right here. These are epaulets. They would go on a soldier's uniform, generally their jacket. We don't know who they belong to. It's possible they belong to William Henry Gist, though he only reached the status of colonel, and it was more of an honorary title as far as we can tell. Something like this would often go on a general's uniform to show their status. But William Henry Gist would have been considered the honorary head of the South Carolina militia during his time as governor, so he may have had these kind of as an honorary status. But again, we don't know. They would have been put on a uniform jacket. So I'm gonna come right around here, and we are actually going to switch off now. And you are gonna hear from Ranger Nate. So I'm gonna come up here, and he's putting on his gloves now so he can touch the artifacts.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining in. What we're gonna look at next is a really cool object. We usually do have it on exhibit. It's one of the things you see when you enter this house. It is a certificate confirming William Henry Gist's election to governor in 1860. And Stephanie had mentioned in here earlier about how some objects we have provenance for, others not. Again, provenance is when we can tell maybe when an object was made, who made it, why it was made, who owned it, how we came to own it, all those sorts of things that tell us about an object's specific story. And this piece right here has all the provenance written right into it. So this is a certificate, again, confirming William Henry Gist's election as governor of South Carolina. And a couple interesting things that stick out when you look at it is that it says that the General Assembly had met and that they elected him governor of South Carolina. And so it was not the people of South Carolina directly voting for the governor, it was their representatives in the state's General Assembly. South Carolina was the last state to have a legislative election, not a popular election for governor. Another thing that sticks out in here is that it says he will serve for 2 years. So the governor's term was only 2 years then, not the 4 years that it is. That happened during Reconstruction, that the governor's term was extended. Before that, during William Henry Gist's time, it is the governor is held to a 2-year term. So he's elected in 1858. That means he'll serve until 1860. He will serve until just before South Carolina secedes from the Union. In fact, his term came to an end the day that the secession convention was organized. And so as Stephanie had mentioned earlier, that's why he's known as a secession governor. It's because he's governor at that very pivotal time in South Carolina's history, and he does play a role in secession. He urges South Carolina to secede. He will be a member of that convention, and he will be one of the signers of the ordinance saying South Carolina is dissolving its ties with the Union. Now that all, of course, leads to the formation of the Confederacy, and it leads to civil war. So some huge moments in our national history, some huge moments in this state's history. And William Henry Gist, whose home we're now standing in here at Rose Hill, he played a role in that. Now that's going to have effects here in this house because he and Mary, they're not just here by themselves. They had 12 kids altogether. By 1860, only 4 of those kids were still alive, and 3 of those kids were sons. Those sons were all in their teenage years or early 20s, and so they're all going to enlist in South Carolina units, join the Confederate Army, and that takes us to our next objects. Because as those sons are enlisting, at least one of them we know goes to a photographer or a studio down in Columbia, and all the sons ended up going to the same studio. It's Warren and Hicks's studio in Columbia, and they would get carte de visites made. So these are pictures of their sons. Up here is their youngest son, David Christopher Gist, and then their oldest son, Richard V. Gist. These are possibilities. We don't have confirmed that these are those 2 sons, but we're pretty sure they are. Down below, there's 2 pictures of the same son, their middle son, William M. Gist, and those we know for sure are William M. Gist. He was their middle son. He rose to the rank of major, serving in the 17th South Carolina, and he was killed in action in Tennessee at 23 years old in 1863, right in the middle of the Civil War. And so it's important to think as we look at these objects, the Gists lost one of their sons. This is one of many homes in this country where people felt the loss of a loved one, and these are the objects that the Gists would have had a sort of final remembrance of their son, William M. Gist. They'd never get to see in person again. And so these photographs have very powerful meanings attached to them. They were kept in this scrapbook, or sorry, not this scrapbook, this album that's right here, and they were filled with other pictures, but we just pulled those ones out because they are the ones of the Gists themselves. But as you can see, this photographic album was made to hold all of these carte de visites. And there are more in the collection. Those are just some special ones we pulled out. We're going to continue on this photographic journey here. We're next going to look at something that actually isn't in our collection, but it's a setup for an object that is in our collection. And what we're looking at is a photographic montage. So Civil War ends in the Confederacy's defeat. It ends, it results in the end of slavery in this country, and added amendments to the Constitution that define national citizenship. Anybody born in this country is considered a citizen of the United States, and eventually the 15th Amendment gives voting rights to all men regardless of their race, skin color, or if they had been previously enslaved. And so that object that Stephanie was just looking at, that photo montage, shows what South Carolina's state government looks like during Reconstruction, these early years right after the Civil War. And just racially, the makeup of the General Assembly was very different than it was just a short time earlier when Gist had been serving as governor. It had been all white men in office before the Civil War. South Carolina's population was more than African American, and so by the time that black men have the right to vote, that means that the General Assembly is going to look very different. There are going to be black leaders elected to the General Assembly. That is, of course, very controversial among white South Carolinians. And so the next object that we have here shows the overthrow of Reconstruction. 2 of the Gist sons who we saw in those photographs there, there's the 2 sons who survived the Civil War. They're in the Ku Klux Klan after the Civil War, and they commit crimes that a lot of the point of them is to overturn Reconstruction, black men's voting rights. And that is something that is ended in South Carolina by around 1876, and that's when this photo montage was made that is in our collection. And this shows then the restoration of white supremacy in the state government. It's the Wallace House, 1876. And by now you have almost all white men in the General Assembly again, with the exception of one black representative, Thomas Hamilton, who's down there at the bottom. And so this is a really interesting object that's in our collection. We can look at a previous object to kind of look at how the state politics changed during Reconstruction.
We're having signal issues.
Signal issues again. All right. Hope everyone's able to stick with us. We just have a few last things to look at here. And we're going back to some objects that we don't have a lot of provenance for. We just know that they were collected here at the site. And so that's what's really important. Some of these things were purchased. Some of these things were handed down through the Gist family, and they ended up in the state of South Carolina's hands to help preserve this site and tell its story. These are items that we found here on the site, and they tell us quite a bit, actually. They tell us a lot about people who were enslaved here, because these objects probably relate to the site's construction. Most of the people who made the materials that went into the building's construction here, the people who actually built these buildings, are going to be enslaved laborers, people of African descent whom the Gists owned legally as property. And so that's what makes these objects very powerful, because we don't have a lot of physical objects that are connected to those people. And that tells that it's harder then to tell their stories and help people connect to them. But this is a way we can do that. Look at this brick right here. This is a brick we found a few years ago in the ground, and it has some very prominent fingerprints in it. And so that tells us that this is a handmade brick. Likely somebody enslaved here made this brick. And some of the earliest accounts for this plantation, possibly having bricks, come from when William Henry Gist's father had this plantation started. He dies in 1819. His will says there were 55,000 bricks laying by the river, which possibly could be the Tiger River just a quarter mile to the north from us today. And so those could be bricks used in this construction. Could be the bricks right here. That same estate inventory also says that there were shingles, lots of oak shingles. That's exactly what we have right here, what I'm holding on to. Enslaved carpenters here may have made these shingles, may have applied them, put them up on the roof of this structure. We have buckets of these oak shingles, and they could go all the way back to this plantation's beginnings. And lastly, we know there were enslaved blacksmiths here. During William Henry Gist's time, 1860, 178 people enslaved here. 4 of them were enslaved blacksmiths, and they would have made nails and horseshoes and other sorts of iron objects. And that's what we have right in front of us. These last ones we recovered from between the floorboards inside of this house just a few months ago. And so this is an overview of everything we have in our collection. These are really important objects. We take care of more than 500 objects altogether in the collection. They help us to tell this site's very significant story. Rose Hill Plantation State Historic Site is a place you can learn about important themes in our state's history, and you can learn about very pivotal moments like the ones we just talked about. You can learn about the Civil War, Reconstruction, these moments that are really important to understanding where we are today and how the past is relevant. And so thank you for joining in. We hope you'll join in tomorrow at 10 a.m. If we don't have any further sorts of technical difficulties, we will keep up our regular schedule. And you all have a great day. Stay safe out there.